Islamic thought and philosophy has been a driving force for many, from the individual to the family to the state. It permeates our lives regardless of our ethnic or geographical origins, and it is as much a force as globalization is. The question is, how do we come to terms with the many debates and questions and tensions surrounding this phenomenon? Who are the stakeholders in the movement of Islamization? What are its future plans? And is this a movement that is integral for Malaysia's development? This week, we have the versatile and outspoken Marina Mahathir as our guest. She will explain the state and condition of Islam in Malaysia and its accompanying challenges. She will also touch on topics regarding gender in the context of Islam. We also have Fuad Rahmat from Project Dialogue and BFM's Night School to talk about Islamic philosophy and secularism in religious discourse.
We're about over 35 years into the process, and it seems to be defining in Malaysia's future, in the sense that institutionally, culturally and politically it's really defined the national imagination, rightly or wrongly. So there's a lot of Malays, I would say, by and large, would identify with it as a positive thing. Those who don't really understand why it has to be that way, why Islam has to inspire cultural, political and social life so much, will feel uneasy about it. So I definitely see in the coming decades Islamization to be a very polarizing issue among Malaysians. Yeah. Personally, it's going to be the cause of a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of tensions. Malaysia is a very complex country demographically, linguistically, culturally, ethnically, historically, ideologically. It's very diverse. Of course, you can say that all countries deal with diversity to a certain extent, but I would say that Malaysia's case is more complicated because the layers of diversity overlap with one another. So you might have linguistic diversity within ethnic homogeneity, right? So similarly, you might have religious diversity within ethnic homogeneity or cultural homogeneity. So to have one cultural agenda override everything will complicate the more important process of assimilation, integration, understanding. So when you have one outlook that's hegemonic over others, then you're going to have tensions, and that will lead to problems. The other thing too is that we tend to forget that Islamization is even a problem within and among Muslims as well, because you have a dominant form of religiosity or piety dictating the terms of what Islam should be like, legally, culturally, in the education system. This leaves little room for different interpretations of Islam. Yeah. So even within the Sunni approach, you might have one that's more dominant, say the kind of so-called Salafi/Wahhabi approach. Then you wonder, well, what about other interpretations of the Sunni school? And then this is to say little of Muslims who do not fall under the Sunni interpretation of Islam, like the Shias or Ahmadis, who have actually suffered the brunt of the Islamic authorities in their attempt to, normalize and make Islam more uniform across the board. So it's not just necessarily a Muslim and non-Muslim issue, but even an issue within and among Malay Muslims in the country. You can even ask, what will happen to the more liberal-minded or more secular kind of oriented Malays who don't necessarily identify with where Islamization is going. What will happen to their rights? What will happen to their autonomy to not abide by the script that the religious authorities have prepared for Malays? So yeah, it's going to fragment us in many ways, I think. So that's the dominant mood right now, in that the air of conformity is so strong And this happens at many levels, culturally, kind of everyday experience, you know, and the kind of things that families talk about, the kind of dress codes that are being imposed and expected of you if you're Malay, the kind of entertainment you're supposed to indulge in, where you're supposed to go, the kind of food you're supposed to eat, the kind of everyday level of conformity. And this is compounded by the kind of institutional reach of the Islamic authorities, right? I mean, if you're a Muslim, you're subject to both legal systems, the federal civil legal system, and of course the state level Sharia legal system. So you're answerable to two courts, right? So you basically have more laws to follow. And then politically, you have the NEP, or rather, it's no longer officially in place, but the mentality of the NEP, the idea that Malays are to be privileged and protected, and that too takes up the definition of Malayness, right? So there's only one way this can play out. You know, you'll be subject to more regulation as a Malay, and with little recourse, you can sense that there's going to be estrangement, you know, for those who might not abide by where things are going. But I would also add that there's a pressure in conforming and abiding as well, because I don't think that anybody is really meant to be subject to so many rules and so many levels of it, that those who do identify with the process, they do so but not in their terms. So that creates tensions as well, you know, abiding by all these expectations still not lead to real empowerment, you know, because real empowerment, in my view, has a lot more to do than just being protected by the state, you know, or conforming in society. That doesn't really mean empowerment or protection, right? To be empowered, to be protected as a community requires a different kind of conversation rather than how many laws should we abide by or how much we have to conform. So it's going to be a very neurotic few decades ahead. Yeah, I think we have to kind of be careful here, because all cultures, to a certain extent, all communal life demands a certain uniformity, you know. So there's the whole idea about face, saving face, and you know, the idea of shame, that's pretty universal. But the problem with the Malay context is that it's been over politicized. What you have essentially since independence onwards is this project to strengthen the Malay nation. And once you embark on that at a national mass level scale, right, then conformity doesn't just become about blending in, it becomes about playing your part in a bigger project. So what's happened since independence? The idea is that Malaysia must be made more Malay, right? We have the constitution that recognizes the special position of the Malays. Then you have the 12, 13 monarchies that are supposed to protect Malay identity, and then you have the NEP, which is supposed to enrich Malays. So the idea is that it's not just belonging; it's really nation building. It's much more compelling to conform because you've been socialized to see Malayness in terms of power. That you're not just an individual who happens to belong to a culture. You are part of a broader development to ensure that your country has Malay stamped all over it, you know. So this is the climate in which you've been taught to identify with Malayness. And of course it doesn't, on a personal level, you don't feel it. I don't feel that, you know, on a personal level, on an everyday level, you don't feel that your life is very political. But we're not just separate, distinct individuals, right? We're always part of a broader world, whether it's kind of socially and culturally, and this ties into a broader national context. So I mean, for example, like I know me and my family, we've been beneficiaries of the NEP. There's no way around it. The kind of how can we look at the statistics to see the increase of Malay doctors, the increase of Malay professionals, the increase of Malays in the civil service, if not for the fact that the government has engineered this to be the case, you know? So we're all over politicized, and that adds to greater anxieties, you know, to play a certain role, to fulfill certain identity tropes and all that. So when there's so much of that pressure happening among other communities, right? So you're not just developing Malays, you're not just Malay. There isn't just a Malay development project, but it's happening in comparison with how Chinese are doing, how the Indians are doing, how the Sabahans and Sarawakians are doing. You really have major status anxieties, you know, because your power isn't secure. You are to develop in a multicultural polity with other Malaysians. So there's always this, you know, this specter of comparison. How well are we doing depends on how well other people are doing, and this just adds more and more pressures, anxieties, and the default mood is just to conform, you know. So Islam has a psychological role in this, in that, you know, it claims to offer a moral code that one must abide by to be saved and to be, you know, to be happy. It provides social context for greater socialization, so going to the mosque, having all these rituals, provides pretext for identity building, for bonding with other Malays. And then of course you have the post-colonial rhetoric around Islamization, you know, this idea that, you know, Islam must succeed, must regain its civilizational glory, that at one point Islam had a golden age. You know, it could be, you know, for the most, you know, typically the history is Baghdad or Spain, but in Malaysia you think of Malacca as an empire. Malays are told to relate to their history with Malacca playing this central role in giving Malay civilization a moment of historical glory, you know. So Islam it provides so many emotional, so many levels of emotional resonance, whether it's in a kind of everyday sense of, you know, meaning in life, having purpose, but then having a pretext to socialize in greater ways, and of course having history that's illustrious and powerful, and then of course a kind of political rallying cry, you know. So when you mix all that with a nation building project that wants to see Malays do well, then you're going to have like conformity on steroids, which is what's happening. Yeah.
I'm Marina Mahathir. I'm basically a writer. I write a fortnightly column in the Star newspaper, and I also sit on the board of Sisters in Islam, and we work on justice and equality for Muslim women in Malaysia.
Right.
The institutions, I suppose the main institution would be JAKIM, which is located in the Prime Minister's Department, Islamic Development Department. And I guess the stakeholders would be government, the religious officials, and I suppose the Muslim population of Malaysia, on which it has the most impact on these policies and laws.
Thank you for that.
And the other, I suppose the other, given the way that Malaysia is structured, the other institutions would be the state religious departments, which are powers in their own right. Yeah. No, I agree with him. I think it's often a matter of education. The word secular has been demonized so much that people seem to think that it's anti-religion. Therefore, if you are a secularist, you must be anti-religion. Unfortunately, in the West, the most prominent secularists are the anti-religion people. So it's been put as a black and white situation. Either you have religion or you don't. But actually, it just means a form of governance. It's not that people don't believe, it's just that people are free to believe whatever they want, and the state has no religion. I think that's the main thing. The state has no religion by itself, and therefore does not direct laws and policies based on any particular religious faith. In truth, I think every country is a mixture. Very few of them, I suppose, apart from maybe communist China or something, does not invoke God or some faith in some way. But the point really is that as long as it does not direct policies and laws, then it's fine. But in Malaysia, where we have a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, the use of just one religion to direct policies is problematic, obviously, for those who don't adhere to it.
Thank you.
Well, of course, there has been a counter-reaction, mostly from non-Muslims. For Muslims, I think there's been a bit of both, because a lot of Muslims in this country, unfortunately, do not have much religious education beyond rituals and sort of the very basic stuff. Not much about ethics or the justice that is inherent in Islam. They seem to think that Islamization is a must, and therefore you shouldn't question it. Islamization with a small I actually should not be problematic, because if Islam stands for justice and equality, it just means that all your laws and policies should be based on justice and equality and human rights, in fact, because Islam does stand for human rights. But the way it's been put forward, it is a particular interpretation of Islam, which is straight, very narrow, often very patriarchal, and very exclusive rather than inclusive. And therefore this is problematic not just to non-Muslims who are excluded from it all, but also to Muslims themselves, because very often the human interpretation doesn't interpret into the principles that Islam stands for, which is justice and equality. A fine example is really the impact on women. The various laws for polygamy, for instance, family laws, marriage, divorce, polygamy, inheritance, guardianship, etc., is problematic because it's based on one interpretation, very narrow, very patriarchal interpretation, where women have less rights. So there are many issues involved with it. It all stems from the idea that of what Islamization means. Islamization means something that is interpreted by a group of people in the narrowest sense. Whereas if you want to take it as broadly as possible, Islamization should mean respect for all human rights, should mean justice, should mean equality.